Yes. Right. Yeah. I don't think chat. Yeah, I don't think we can turn that on.
All right, ready for me to stop share? Stop share, kill the chat.
Transcription. Good. Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dave Bullock, the chair of the Board of Trustees, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and I'm going to call to order a special meeting of our board to discuss delegation of authority. And at this time, I'm going to call on the Secretary of the University, Malcolm Turner, to call the roll, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. Artis Neal.
Here.
Mr. Bullock.
Here.
Mr. Bryan.
Here.
Mr. Davis.
Here.
Dr. Jones.
Here.
Mr. Cotis.
Here.
Mr. McCullen.
Present.
Mr. Meekins.
Here.
Mr. Patel. Mr. Patel. Mr. Pryor.
Right.
Mr. Richards.
Here.
I am here, and Mrs. White.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Before we begin, at each meeting, it is the duty of the chair to read the statement of ethics. As chair of the Board of Trustees, it is my responsibility to remind all members of the board of their duty under the State Government Ethics Act to avoid conflicts of interest and appearances of conflict of interest as required by this act. Each member has received the agenda and related information for this Board of Trustees meeting. If any board member knows of any conflict of interest or appearance of conflict with respect to any matter coming before the Board of Trustees at this meeting, the conflict or appearance of conflict should be identified at this time. Does anybody have a conflict that they're aware of? Okay, great. Hearing none, we'll proceed. I'm going to start with some, actually, would you like to start first? Or do you want me to go ahead and start first? Okay. I want to start with some opening comments on this exercise. First of all, I view personally the exercise of taking a look at board authority and delegations of authority as an opportunity for the university. I've taken the approach to look at it in three buckets. The first bucket being the identification of the authorities of the board and the authorities of the chancellor as they relate to the authorities granted by the Board of Governors and those authorities that were reserved by the Board of Governors. Thanks to a lot of hard work. And I want to personally thank Charles Marshall, our general counsel, who is to my left today, his team members, Micah Maloof and Ann Fox, for their work, Nate Knuffman and his team, and Becky Mangini, who is Vice Chancellor of Human Resources Personnel, for their work. Vice Chancellor Knuffman is the CFO of the university. There are a lot of man hours that have gone into identifying what these authorities are, who has authority to do what at the university. And it's not as if the university was not running and doing the business of the university every day. But there were areas sometimes where the chancellor or the board and or the Board of Governors may not know where those authorities lie. And this exercise has been an opportunity to identify those authorities. That was bucket number one. Bucket number two is the opportunity for this board, as it sits today in 2021, to take a look at today and as we move forward. Those areas where this board believes that authority should lie with the board. So that is an opportunity that this board has. I want to emphasize that it's been my experience with this board and with the previous iteration of this board that I served on, that at all times the board has worked closely with the administration on all these matters. This board as comprised now and as comprised in previous iterations that I was a member of has not worked outside the parameter of working with the administration and in concert. And I think we cooperate really well with the administration as we currently stand. The third sort of bucket is the opportunity to leave a legacy to future board members. So when board members come into the role as a member of the Board of Trustees, they are given a roadmap. They are given a notebook, as it were. So future board members are able to understand what their role is within the university and where they will have an opportunity to make a difference. I think that's a very important third prong that we've sort of taken the approach of. This exercise was scheduled by the Board of Governors. We are, and as I said in our previous meeting, we would be a week late due to the requirements the Board of Governors set out, but I have had a conversation with President Hans and with Chair Ramsey of the Board of Governors, and they were amenable to us proceeding today with a proposed resolution to send to the President. And I do want to make a couple of comments about that. The actions that we will take today relate to only a proposed resolution. What is passed today will not go into effect. It will simply be a proposal that this board will submit to the president of the university pursuant to the resolution passed by the Board of Governors. That resolution will be looked at and scrubbed by the system office, and I have been assured that they will do it in concert with our board. But it will be looked at, and then a final version will then be sent back to our board, and we will be asked to approve that as an operating format moving forward. So I wanted to be really clear on that. I want to be clear on one other point. The resolution that members of the board have is simply a draft resolution. Because we are a public body and this is public policy, there's no format for us to get together informally and discuss this. This is policy that needs to be discussed with transparency to the public. Myself and Mr. Marshall and his team, Mr. Knupman and Ms. Mangini and Mr. Summers and Chancellor Guskowitz and his team have worked really hard over the last 2 weeks to sort of put together this basic document. It is a basic document that lays out sort of the authorities that are granted by the Board of Governors, by the legislature, to the Board of Trustees, and to the Chancellor, and to the university, and where those authorities lie. It is a comprehensive document. The draft that I put forward to members of the board contains 3 suggested changes that I would personally propose. That does not mean that it's a fully baked cake. That does not mean that this is the way it's going to be. But since I worked on it for the last 2 weeks, I figured I'd go ahead and write mine in. But those are just my suggestions to the board. And I anticipate we'll have a discussion on those suggestions. At this point, though, I do want to turn it over. I'm going to turn it over to the Chancellor for his comments on this. And then I'd like to turn it over to General Counsel, Mr. Marshall, for some comments about the document itself and what is actually contained in the documents that members of the board have. Mr. Chancellor.
Thank you, Chair Bullock. As I said back in our September Board of Trustee meeting, I think this is a healthy exercise that we've been going through over the past several weeks with members of our leadership team to really take a closer look at these delegated authorities. Many of them were put in place in around 1972. And so it certainly is time. While many of them have been revised and updated since then, others were not. So I think this is, again, a healthy exercise. Having said that, I do think that it's important to recognize that this UNC-Chapel Hill is a very large enterprise with hundreds of transactions and personnel actions that take place monthly, if not weekly. And I think that we need to be sure that in order to keep a $3.4 billion a year enterprise moving efficiently, that we need to be sure that the approval process remains timely and efficient so that our campus operations are unaffected. So with that, I am pleased to sort of talk about the resolution and any proposed changes.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chancellor. This time I'm going to turn the floor over to General Counsel, Mr. Marshall. Mr. Marshall and I have become even better friends over the last 2 weeks, working on sort of categorizing these. So I turn it over to you for some comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last time we met, I talked for 2 hours, 23 minutes, I think. So I'll make it probably less than 2 minutes here, because I think, as the chair said, it's a policy-making exercise. So I want to allow plenty of time for that. Just very quickly, I think I can distill what is in front of you to what really matters for purposes of today, because a lot of this, you've seen it before. Some of it's in a different format. So let me just walk through it very quickly. The first thing you have is the draft resolution that Chair Bullock mentioned. It's only about 2.5 pages. And while not word for word, it reflects a lot of what I presented in the last presentation in terms of sort of the general nature of some of the authority. But if you read it, again, it's only 2.5 pages, but that's before you today. The exhibits, even though they are relatively large compared to the resolution, let me quickly tell you what it is, because some of it is just a restatement of what's already at the university. The first exhibit is just our current policy for who signs what contract. I think we've seen some other universities in this exercise just attach that to the resolution. It's an existing policy. It's already there, but I thought it'd be helpful to have it in one place, as a lot of you all mentioned last time. Second is a personnel chart. This is the same personnel chart that was circulated at the draft of the last meeting. It includes some of the proposed changes Chair Bullock mentioned, and he can point those out to you in a moment, but it's the same chart, but for his proposed changes. The third exhibit is the largest. It's a detailed chart of all of your authority and a description of what has been delegated to campus. You have already seen this in a different form, which was that summary memo I did that was sort of in a narrative form that we walked through line by line last time. This is just a different data collection version of it, right? It's in a chart format that, again, some of the other campuses that use this format. I thought it was easier to discuss it last time in that readable summary. This is just converting it back into this chart format. And then the final document is just a copy of the current BOT bylaws and your appeal procedures from some of these appeals that come before you. Again, no changes there, but it's just showing again and putting in one place your governing documents. So that's all I have in terms of what's in front of you, but I want to make it clear that the main thing that's being proposed in terms of changes today, or that's relatively new, is the actual resolution on top and the personnel, the proposed personnel changes that Chair Bullock, I think, is going to propose and discuss that are contained in Exhibit B. And Mr. Chairman, unless there are questions, that's it.
Yeah, let me ask, are there any questions from members of the board to Mr. Marshall?
Dave, I've got a couple of questions. I'm not sure who the best person to answer them will be. regarding some of the delegated authorities like approval of settlement agreements, contracts for research, and agreements with outside counsel, and intellectual property contracts.
Okay, well, Mr. Cotis, Trustee Cotis, I'll bring that up with you at the appropriate time when we get into a general discussion. Is that okay?
Sounds great.
Okay, good. Okay, great. So if nobody has any questions for Mr. Marshall, I'm gonna start off with just an indication and clarity. And Charles, you may want to jump in, and we'll open this up for discussion. And what I'll ask is if you would like to make a comment, have a question, or would like to make a proposal, we're gonna take those in order. What's the best way to do that, Mr. Assistant Secretary? I have it up for discussion. I mean, we'll just open it up for discussion. We're gonna need a motion and then a second and then a discussion.
You get the whole thing, and wrap all the minutes up. You gotta just revise it. And you get the motion for the body now. But you're not.
Right.
Get feedback from all at once.
Yeah, so I think what we'll do, probably the best way to run this is to get everybody's feedback on the document and on the ideas. Let me clarify a couple things. One, the resolution, except, and what you have in front of you, except for, and you may even have the original in front of you because I'm not sure that the changes went through them, Michael. Based on this, they did. I am proposing 3 specific changes, and I really would like to have welcome feedback on it from board members. And I'll let the technical folks bring you into the discussion in the correct order. First suggestion that I have made relates to appointment of fixed-term faculty members. Currently, the rule is, or the sort of the delegated authority on fixed-term faculty members, all fixed-term faculty members are delegated to the deans of the schools. And what I have proposed is that fixed-term faculty members be broken into 2 groups. One, appointments of greater than 3 years and more than $100,000 annual salary go to the chancellor, who would subdelegate that to the provost office for approval of those fixed-term faculty positions. The second group of fixed-term faculty members would remain with the deans, subdelegated from this board to the deans, for new appointments of 3 years or less than $100,000 annual salary. And the rationale on that is that as we enter into issues related to budget, I personally believe, and I know many members of this board believe, that it's important for the chancellor to have a handle on fixed-term faculty that are going to be in place for more than 3 years. I don't think that is necessarily a dramatic change, because I think most of the times a lot of these deans will communicate with the provost anyway about those types of positions. The subdelegated less than 3 years or less than $100,000 annual salary, that is, and I've had long discussions with the chancellor about this, or fairly detailed discussions. I believe that enables the deans to have flexibility to keep trains running on time, because you'll have a lot of faculty that may be hired to do a first-year English class because of increased enrollment. The medical school has a tremendous number of fixed-term faculty members who are at 3 years or less, and they're going to be over 100,000. That's why the word "or" is in there, and that allows Dr. Burks and his team to keep physicians on staff. I'm proposing that. I'm also proposing that senior academic and administrative officer tier 2s, new appointments be approved by the Board of Trustees in a same or similar manner as deans and vice chancellors. That would go to the Board of Trustees. Now, I want to emphasize that none of the work of the Board of Trustees, at least in my experience, has been Board of Trustees only. These are in concert with Chancellor and with his team. These positions come up through the university and they go through the Chancellor's office to the board for approval. It's simply an approval mechanism. And I think it's a great opportunity for us as a board, as we enter into the budgetary process, to have a real understanding of the tier 2 positions, how many there are, what the salaries are, what their job descriptions are, how they relate to the strategic plan, and give us an opportunity to work with the Chancellor's office and the Provost's office with respect to those positions. The other change that I am proposing is really a two-part change. And I have talked to Director Cunningham about this, and that is one, for this board to approve salary ranges for athletics assistant coaches. We have a very robust and complex athletic department with a lot of teams and a lot of coaches. We also have assistant coaches who are very competitively sought after. I've talked to the athletic director. He actually believes that would be helpful to him in the sense that we as a board are giving him some parameters on assistant coaches. So when the head coaches are out hiring coaches, they already have a number that they can work within. Additionally, salary changes for athletic assistant coaches, I am proposing that come to the Board of Trustees, the same as would a head coach. And the rationale there is there are many coaches, assistant coaches on campus who make a tremendous amount of money. And I don't think it's unrealistic for us to sort of see those contracts, because they're going to, most of the time, those end up coming to us and then they move on to the Board of Governors. So if we've had an opportunity to see those, when it does go to the Board of Governors, there's that added level of, well, the Board of Trustees has seen it, looked at it, and it actually, I believe, will be more efficient at the Board of Governors level, moving those coaches' salary changes ahead. Those are the proposed changes in terms of authority that I'm proposing, and I would open that up for individual discussion on those matters or additions that others would like to make. Let's start with just comments on my changes. And Mr. Trustee Meekins.
Thank you, Chair Bowles. First of all, let me thank you particularly for all the work and time you put into this. I know it's been very labor intensive, and also the legal staff and the Chancellor staff as well. And I admire the work, and I'm really glad that y'all are going to make sure that it's codified and put into a book so that future trustees can get it. That's very important. Just as a general statement, I've looked at the three proposals you've made, and I've had some time to look at them. I don't have any problem with two of them, but one of them I'm not sure about. I don't know that I'm against it. I just don't know. And I guess before we even start this process, would like to say, if anybody else has suggestions, if something pops up today, for instance, I'm not going to feel very comfortable voting on it unless and until I have an opportunity to really vet it and think about it and study it. So I want to go ahead and let that out before somebody else starts making suggestions. So, but as far as I'm concerned, two of them don't have any problem with. I don't know how other people feel. I'm not speaking for others. A third, the one with the tier 2, I don't know the details of how that operates and how many we're talking about and what kind of time commitment we're talking about as far as that. And I guess I would want to, if maybe we can do that today. maybe we can talk about that today and figure that out. And then I might be ready to vote for it. But some of these others, if it's a new thing, I've not seen it, heard it, smelled it, I doubt very seriously I'm going to want to vote on it because I don't want to vote on something I don't know much about.
Well, and I appreciate that. And Teresa, I'm gonna get to you right now. I just wanted to comment on that. Thanks, Ralph. Trustee Meekins. This is sort of just the exercise. There's no real, there's no real platform for us to be able to meet behind closed doors and make these policy decisions. This is a transparent discussion that we need to have. And again, my intent on presenting this document, other than the three changes, sort of 3.5 changes that I've put on there, nothing in this document changes the current mode of operation. It's the way the university has operated. There's no clawback of authority other than what I've proposed, and that's not in stone. That is simply a proposal that I wrote in. I took the liberty to do that since I was working on it, and it certainly can be removed if that's the will of the board. I'm in favor of it, however. But if the will of the board is to remove any of those parts, but this is the opportunity to be heard. That was the point, and I appreciate what you're saying, Trustee Meekins, but the point of having Mr. Marshall give us the 2.5 hours of what our authority was is to get everybody up to speed on it. So if you had some ideas or some thoughts, you could bring it to the table today.
Right. Well, it was my understanding that we were going to required to present this to the Board of Governors, and I was looking at it in light of that, and thought that everyone did an excellent job in making that presentation to the Board of Governors. To the extent that we're going to be making changes to it, in other words, I don't see why we can't go ahead and submit the plan as it is, perhaps adopt your changes, but we always have the ability to, sit down together after if something new comes up today. In other words, I don't want to make any decisions on the fly. So if something new comes up today that somebody may think is a good idea, I'm probably going to want to hesitate and think about it. And I don't see why we can't, make sure we get the presentation and get the resolution to the Board of Governors in a timely fashion, with the opportunity to always come back and tweak it and make some, sit down and give it some deep thought on what some changes need to be. And I've already done so with yours. And like I said, I don't have any problem with 2 of them. The third one, I don't know that I have a problem with, but I probably will have some questions about it.
And I'm going to open that up for question on the tier 2 because I think that needs to be discussed, and I'm ready to put forth my information. I know Becky has some information on that, and I know the Chancellor has some information on that. I've had discussions with the Chancellor about the tier 2. Trustee Neal.
Yes, I just need to make sure I understand your proposal. Is it in written form somewhere that we could see it and read it? And if we've been sent it, then I apologize. I just can't find it. So has your proposal been sent us in writing?
It should be in your email.
Okay, because I'm looking at both the full draft, and if I could be directed to the page. And I asked this question because when I was taking notes on your proposal, I thought you were saying as it related to the fixed term appointments, that would be 3 years and $100,000 as the trigger. But then I thought I heard you a few minutes ago say it's or. So that's why I was hoping to look at the actual language to see how that phrase is written, because I wasn't clear as to whether it was an and or an or.
Excellent point. And I will tell you how it's written.
Oh, what page is that on? Can you tell us?
It's in Appendix 1. Micah, how is that? Share it. He's going to share it on the screen. Okay. Can you see that?
I have the chart, but I was trying to see the actual language that the resolution would be drafted in. I do have that, but I thought that we were taking your proposal and editing the resolution to reflect this.
So this is not coming to the Board of Trustees. I am proposing that these go to the provost or to the chancellor, who's subdelegated it to the provost. And that is fixed term faculty for greater than 3 years and $100,000, more than $100,000 salary. That needs to be, that I'm proposing that should be reviewed by the chancellor and the provost. And then all other appointments, we've changed the language, all other appointments subdelegated to the deans, because everything else would fall into what my initial thought was, is to subdelegate the deans new appointments of 3 years or less than 100,000. So it didn't matter. It encompasses all the rest. The only thing that would remain with the deans, everything except a fixed term under my proposal, it would remain with the deans except for appointments of greater than 3 years and more than 100,000. And that would simply go to the provost.
Okay, David, I got that. The question I'm asking you is your proposal in a written form? I have this chart. I'm just asking you.
Yeah.
So you're saying that it would not be necessary to present it in a prose form, in a text form outside of a chart to the Board of Governors? Is that what you're saying?
Resolution, and the resolution refers to the chart.
Oh, okay, so that's how it would be stated. I'm just trying to clarify the form in which the change would be presented.
Under number 3 of the resolution, it incorporates that, because it incorporates the delegation and subdelegations in the chart.
Okay. And then the last question I had was just in reference to trying to understand the impact of the tier 2 change, because I have absolutely no idea how many personal actions we're talking about. And if that's something that you said that we will be hearing about later, I can wait till later.
Yeah, I'm gonna have Becky talk to that. I think it's, as I recall, it was 220 to 400 a year.
So what I would appreciate if she can speak to, or whoever be appropriate to speak to, exactly what does that mean for the trustees? If we're talking about 250 to 400 transactions, what does it mean that we would be reviewing and doing out of a body of 13 people who meet 6 times a year? I think it's really important that we understand what that means in practical terms from a workload standpoint.
Yep, I agree. No problem. Thank you. Trustee Richards.
Everybody hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Great. Actually, I'm gonna follow Trustee Artie Neal's comments and just wait until Becky have a chance to present. I'll just also add, if it's not in your presentation, could it also be hit on exactly, because my concern is I really want to know verbatim what would come to the trustees, because what I heard a lot of trustees say on the prior iteration of the board in particular was that they felt that the tenure process for us was just a rubber stamp. And I'm concerned that this would also be that if we just given a list of names, doing roles that we may not know anything about in the same Excel sheet form over and over again several times. So I just really want to hear from Becky, I guess, in detail about what that would entail.
Trustee Richards, let me say that I think those comments are well taken, but that also, again, everything that's done here is not a stone document. This is not the only time delegations and policy can be passed by this board. If this board has the will or the willingness or the want to pass a policy that directs the provost and the chancellor's team to come before the board with more information on tenure decisions or more information on individual decisions that the Board of Trustees has approval over, then we can pass a policy requiring that. Am I correct on that? I believe I am. I'm correct. What I thought with the general counsel on that issue. So I'm clear that we can do that. So, you know, I would encourage you to come up with some ideas on that, Trustee Richards. All right, anybody else have any comments, questions? Okay, Becky, Ms. Mangini, Vice Chancellor, I guess Vice Chancellor Mangini, I'd like for you to maybe comment on the tier 2, please.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today. I think it's fair to say that we have a mechanism by which, or through which, from which we could take some guidance in that the board already approves tier 1s. I won't deny that I have a little bit of anxiety about this proposal because currently we have 24 tier 1s that the board is responsible for approving, and the pool of tier twos is actually about 488. So you're taking on a much bigger volume. That said, we can certainly look at what we do with the tier ones and figure out a mechanism to get it to work for you all. You're right, and the numbers are about 220 hires annually in this space. The tier twos include positions like as you all know, like the associate and assistant vice chancellors, associate and assistant deans and provosts. It also includes development professionals and marketing folks, communications people, but they also include positions that there's generally one of in every campus. And the tier twos are actually authorized by the UNC system. So it's very clear what those are. So a director of admissions, a director of athletics, a director of budget, a director of financial aid, a director of audit. Generally, there's one person in each of these roles. It's important to note that because there's one person in each of these roles and the next step is usually being in charge of the larger unit, this is an area that's heavily recruited away from campus. These people are usually our best performers and the ones that are most sought out by other places. So that's an important element to note in that we have about 200 hires every year. We also have between 200 and 400 job change actions. So if you're looking at also, as I understand the grid, also taking on salary adjustments, that 200 to 400 actions doesn't include all permanent, or it includes permanent salary adjustments. It also includes temporary and promotions and some other things, but the number of transactions you'd be taking on would be larger than just the initial hire. I think that's important to know just because we're talking about volume. And, we can certainly address that moving forward. I think the reason I talk, or the one area I guess I would say is probably worth asking some questions about, and some of you have asked, like, what do we do and what would this look like? In our shop, when we get a request for a tier 2 hire, if it's not an existing position that already exists, we have to go to the system office and get approval to hire a tier 2. Over time, over the last 8 years, we've seen an increase of a total of 8 positions at the UNC-Chapel Hill campus in tier 2. So this is a pretty static group of employees. We don't add a lot. In fact, we've decreased the number of particularly associate vice chancellors and assistant vice chancellors over the last several years. When we get a request to make an adjustment for one of these employees, we spend some time saying, okay, what is the current reference rate for this person? You all set the salaries, you approve the salary ranges. We say, what is the current market rate? And then what are they trying to get them to? And what are those percentages? Does the percentage growth trigger the threshold by which we would need to send it up to the system office or to the Board of Governors P&T committee? Or is this something that can be done under local authority? We also asked, do the duties warrant what the proposed amount of an increase is? Are those duties considered classifiable duties for additional information? And we have a whole roster of things that are approved for that sort of thing. We look at what impact this will have on others in the unit. What are the equity concerns about if we give this person an increase and we don't increase others? What sort of issue or impact is that going to have? What sort of equity concerns do we have about protected status? Is this person getting something that others in the unit that are of protected status will not? And what will that mean? How have we treated similarly impacted folks in the past? So if somebody else was promoted for additional duties a year ago, if they got 6%, would this next person also get roughly 6%? Will the increase create compression issues? So if we increase somebody, are we getting the people too far or below them? Is there an impact? Is this a preemptive retention that we're trying to keep somebody here? Do we have a documented offer of retention in hand? Does the market bear the retention request, if that's the sort of request it is? Are there other market forces or other market indicators that we need to seek out? So if it's a medical school increase or a dental school increase, we might use the American Association of Medical Colleges documentation or the dental colleges documentation. Or do we have other factors, like is there an EOC complaint or some other thing involved in this? So there's a pretty lengthy list of things we go through in preparing this. We can tell you that we've done that. How every one of these positions, because many of them are individual, is going to have its own market. So we're going to have to tell you where they sit vis-a-vis the market and why that is. And that we've done all of this analysis. If in fact we're bringing 400 additional transactions to you and you want answers to every one of those questions, we're going to have to think about how we staff that. Or if you all are going to need to do the analysis to do some of that, we're going to want to talk a little bit about how we staff that piece. And the one area where I have to be honest with you, I think we can make all of it work, but I am a little bit concerned about retentions, to be really honest with you, particularly to Trustee Artis Neal's point of you all meet 6 times a year. We are already up quite a bit. We have 929 retirements and resignations this year, which means we're already up over last year's numbers. This group is one of the primary sources of recruitment elsewhere. We know that the national data says that for every departure, we spend at least 33% of that person's salary to replace them. So we want to be able to keep our best people here as opposed to spending that those additional dollars. What I worry a little bit about is if we have to come to this group and you're only meeting 6 times a year, or even if you meet more regularly, if we have an urgent retention, I think we need to figure out a mechanism by which we can do that, because we've even had someone where we've had to navigate with the system office, and the Board of Governors delay has been a challenge, because if the somebody in the Research Triangle Park is offering somebody an increase now, and we say we're going to match it, but you have to wait until the Board of Governors approves it, the candidate is saying, I've got sure dollars here, I've got to wait 2 months over here, they're going to leave us. And we don't really want to see that with our best people. So the one piece I'd encourage you to think a little bit about is retentions with this group, and whether we can manage some sort of a joint authority or more regular meetings or some other type of that thing. There is a lot of behind the scenes work, and this population is quite a bit larger than the tier 1s for which you already have approval on hires and salary adjustments. But I certainly, and our team is certainly eager to work with you to figure out how we navigate moving forward. I'm happy to answer any specific questions. I've got a whole bunch of data with me, and I'm sorry I'm away from my office, so I'm doing a little bit of paper flying. Just deal with me, please.
Okay, and can I see the Secretary Turner? You have a question?
Just a quick question, just precision. With tier 2, is it what you're proposing? Is it the hiring, and that's to be precise, or is the hiring plus all of these additional transactions, retention, salary adjustments, et cetera? Because I think it's, if I heard it correctly, maybe I misunderstood at the top, proposing just the hiring of tier 2, but not necessarily all the subsequent transactions that we just went through. Just so I can think about it the right way. What exactly do we mean when we say the tier 2? Is it just the hiring that you were proposing, or?
Yeah, thank you.
I'm trying to figure out where the starts and stops are, to be precise. Yes.
That's a great question, because the discussion that the Chancellor and I had was hiring, initial hiring. I don't propose that we necessarily approve salary adjustments to current staff. If that, I know that's on the charter, that's on the chart that I know that the Chancellor has, but I did not propose that specifically. My proposal was on initial hires, not on salary adjustments.
You won't get any complaints.
You've already got a range, and if you have to, as you've already stated, Vice Chancellor Mangini, if you're going to go out of that certain range, you're going to have to get approval at the Board of Governors level anyway already. I mean, if you want the, I don't see the need for redundancy of going out of the range of of salary adjustments for current tier 2 employees, if, because you're already taking that to the Board of Governors, as you just articulated to the board. If it's more than 19, I think it's 19% or 19 some odd percent, let's say more than 20% raise or increase in salary, that's going to have to go through P&T and the Board of Governors. Correct, Ms. Vice Chancellor, is that correct?
That is
You're on-
correct. And the detail on that is on the bottom of your Exhibit B, I think it is.
I don't know where, I mean, we can take that line out of salary changes outside the annual raise process because there's already a mechanism in place for that. What my proposal was is that initial hires be approved by the Board of Trustees. Now, the mechanism on how that happens, because we currently meet 6 times a year, can also be adjusted by the creation of a personnel committee that can meet more regularly to work in concert with your office and with the Chancellor's office to effectuate, as I've said, keeping the trains running on time.
Yeah, I would say that that adjustment, and we can certainly provide other information for information only, but that adjustment would make a considerable difference in the impact this would have on the staffing piece of it and on your responsibilities in sort of in managing the approvals. You certainly won't get any complaints on my end.
Yeah, I want to thank Secretary Turner for bringing that to the board's attention. You are exactly right. I didn't intend on that. And Vice Chancellor Mangini, well, I think we talked about that. I don't know how that got necessarily put in because, you know, if you've already got them hired, there is a range and a normal retention raise increase mechanism that you have in place. And when it goes outside that range, there's already a mechanism in place provided by the Board of Governors that you're going to have to, there's no sense in adding an additional hoop for you there. But I do think it's helpful for the board to be at that initial process. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Provost.
make a note on the assistant deans and associate dean categories under this tier 2.
Sure.
Just want to let everyone know that the majority of these individuals are existing faculty who then take on additional responsibilities while they're within their normal appointment. And so they have a base salary and usually they continue to do research and teaching and they assume additional responsibilities as an assistant dean or an associate dean, and then they receive a stipend. So I just wanted to make it clear that most of those individuals are fractional administrative appointments. And it might change the way you think about them in terms of a hire at a very high salary versus an individual who currently has a salary and then they're given a administrative stipend for taking on additional administrative duties within the school.
Thank you, Mr. Provost. Any other comments on my recommendations from the board? Do I have any other questions?
I'd like you to make those changes. So everyone.
Yes, please.
Procedurally, I think what we're talking about doing, just so everyone understands this. We have a live document right now that the chair is in control of. He's gonna get the feedback from the members and then adjust it as he sees fit. Once all those revisions are done, then we can start making amendments to your actual document. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So Michael's gonna make the changes now, which members can see online.
Yes.
Change them, we're on page 3 of Exhibit B, correct? You're gonna change those the way that we discussed it. Put them back up. All right. Yeah, share the screen. Right. Yes. He's gonna change it and then share it with everyone.
I didn't write that.
So basically,
Yes. I'm sorry if I miscommunicated. That's why we're doing it. That's the point. Because I want you to know that was correct.
Remember,
I did not. I think it was very clear. I didn't know that.
we're just having some technical adjustments here. Just please bear with us. One of the downsides of having to live
Well,
in
there's already
the
a mechanism. I mean, if it goes more than 19%, it's got to go to the DOT. Yeah.
figure out what's going on. But go ahead. Members, we apologize for the delay. We're having some technical issues on the accounts to log on to be able to share the screen of the document. So we're very sorry about this. Please bear with us. Thank you. Just a couple of minutes, I hope. So members, we're back now, and Micah is editing the document to go back to what the chair thought was in there. So you see him making the changes now. He's changing the delegation back to the chancellor the way it was for salary changes.
Is that, is there there's not a note? There's not. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Okay, does everyone understand the change we made? My initial intent was to propose to the board that we approve new tier 2 hires, not salary changes. There's already a mechanism for that. Any additional questions or comments? Okay, as Assistant Secretary Summers said, we have a live document here that I am proposing. So the proper procedure from here forward is for there to be a motion to accept this document and a second. After the second, under Robert's rules, we will have the ability for discussion and motions to amend. So do I have a motion to accept the document? Wait a minute. I'm making a motion to accept. Do I have a second?
Second, it's Rob Bryan.
The entire document. The entire document. I have a second from Rob Bryan. Mr. Secretary, will you take the roll on a vote?
Yes.
Are we discussing any more changes to this, or is
Yes,
it?
sir. Yes, sir. So Trustee Cotis, what I described before, and let me clear that up again. This mask is not helpful. We are accepting this document as a live document. So under Robert's rules, we can then have discussion and acceptance of amendments. So we have to have a live document to start with. We can't just throw amendments on the board. We have to have a document in which to amend. So I have submitted, I've got a first and a second to accept this document in its entirety. We'll have a vote to accept it. Or we don't have a vote to accept it yet. Well, now that I've got a second, we can then open it. Now we can open up for discussion and amendments. Okay, so at this point, is there any discussion? Let's just let me know if you need to discuss anything by using your little hand signal on Zoom.
I've had my hand up on there, but I don't see
I
it.
can't see it, Mark. Mr. Cotis, I'm sorry. Your fantastic artwork behind you is blurring your hand. So I apologize. Yes, sir, Trustee Cotis.
Okay, so how would you like to go in order? Do you want to go through via Exhibit A, then B that way with questions?
Well, yes, sir. It depends on what you want to do. I mean, you wanted to, is this
All right.
discussion or amendments?
Well, I guess it's first clarification because some of these are just 4 words. And so.
Yes, sir. Okay. So clarification would be discussion. So the floor is yours, Trustee Coates.
Okay, so in Exhibit A, approval of settlement agreements. It's not clear who that's been delegated to or at what level that's been delegated.
So the Board of Trustees has delegated to the Chancellor execution of agreements and bank accounts.
Chancellor delegated settlement authority to the Vice Chancellor for Finance and Operations. And that's also subject to delegation from the President of up to $75,000. Anything 75 and above goes to the President for approval.
So the Board of Trustees delegating to the Chancellor execution of agreements and bank accounts. That delegation is also subject to policy set by the Board of Governors and the Board of Trustees.
Okay, so that clarifies that item for me. I guess it's good to know if there's a limit to it, then we don't maybe it's not as big a deal, but if it's a $20 million settlement, let's say, that would be different. So you're saying approval of settlements above 75 grand goes to the president.
That's right. And over 249 go to the Board of Governors.
Still on page 1, contracts, proposals, agreements for research and sponsored programs. Is there a dollar amount limit on that as well?
I'm not aware. That's the delegation from the chancellor to vice chancellor for research. I can't speak to this specifically, but I'm not aware if there's a sub-delegation limit.
Okay. Agreements with outside counsel.
That's delegated from the chancellor to our office. And that's also with authority from the president, based on new authority from the General Assembly.
And what's the dollar amount limit on that?
There's not a dollar amount limit on that.
Okay. I would propose a change here that we have agreements over a certain dollar amount come before the chancellor or at a certain level, and then come before the Board of Trustees at a higher level. And I'm referring mainly to the instances where we've spent, 10 or $15 million on outside legal fees.
Well, Trustee Cotis, that delegation actually doesn't run through the Board of Trustees. This initial matter.
We run it, Trustee Cotis, I believe it runs through the chancellor from the Board of Governors.
From the president.
From the president. And the Board of Governors has to check on the president on that. Is that correct?
Well, I thought we had at the beginning, the execution of agreements was delegated from the Board of Trustees to the chancellor. And so wouldn't that fall under execution of agreements?
That's actually a question that I also had. That's very confusing for me on the chart.
Well, here's the issue. I mean, I think you're going from general to specific. So there is a specific delegation that relates to agreements with outside counsel, and there is a general delegation of execution of agreements. When you have a specific delegation, the specific overrides the general as a matter of law.
Well, again, that's why I'm bringing up the specific here.
Yeah, but that we don't have any, the Board of Trustees has no authority over that delegation with counsel. That doesn't run through the Board of Trustees. It runs through the president of the system. That's my understanding. Is that correct, Mr. Marshall? That's right.
So the Board of Trustees has no oversight over agreements with outside counsel.
Only settlements under $75,000, I believe, and that may be, I think that's us. Is that us or is that the?
No, that's the chancellor.
That's the chancellor. So we
Again,
don't
I'm
have any-
trying to understand. So let's say you wanted to hire an outside counsel and spend $10 million with them. Who reviews and approves that?
I'm gonna call on the general counsel to answer that question.
Who approved the outside counsel for
Right.
a $10 million?
Right. There's not, the nature of outside counsel agreements, Trustee Cotis, is usually not going to have a hard dollar amount on the front end in the same way, say, a widget contract would. So we're getting into a much more delicate nuance with the way legal representation agreements are structured. Again, this isn't something that flows through the Board of Trustees. This is something I'd be happy to talk to you about offline at any time, maybe even before the next meeting, because it might be helpful to go through some of the other authorities. And I can maybe answer some more specific questions offline.
Sure. And I hire attorneys all the time, but I guess what doesn't make sense is you've got a $75,000 settlement limit where it has to get kicked up with the president, but you can spend 10 or $15 million on legal fees without it getting kicked up to anyone for review and approval. So my comment here would be that I believe the Board of Trustees should review and approve any spending with outside counsel over $500,000.
Is that in the form of an amendment for a
That
policy?
is in the form of an amendment, but I have some other items I'd like to discuss as well. Do you want to take these one-on-one or one by one? Or?
Trustee Cotis, with respect to your amendment, that is, I would, not in an unfriendly way, I would say that's out of order only because it's a policy, not a delegated authority.
Okay.
So we can make that, as a resolution and at the next board meeting as a policy that the board accept. A lot of these are subject to.
No, I'm fine with, I hear you on that. So if instead the BOG sets its policy, the BOG is the one that should discuss these limitations, is that correct? It's
No,
beyond
sir.
our purview.
No, I'm saying that if you are proposing that our board take up the idea of a policy with respect to limitations on legal fees, that is a separate action that is not a delegated authority. That is a policy action. So it's out of order as to, with respect to delegated authority on this resolution. It would be a separate action as a policy that the board could take up.
I would say that the,
Could you clarify, just because I'm trying to understand, I looked at the proposal that you made that talks about salaries over 100K going to a different approval. So there's references further down to dollar amounts.
Right.
I'm just trying to make sure I stay within the lanes here. How is that different?
It's different because we have that authority. That authority is specifically directed to the Board of Trustees. The limitations on legal fees is not a specific authority that is directed to the Board of Trustees. I'm not sure that even if we passed a policy would have legal effect.
legal affairs generally don't run through the Board of Trustees. The authority for legal affairs runs through the chancellor to the office of university counsel.
Okay, and it doesn't go to the Board of Governors or the president.
Settlement authority does, and the ultimate outside counsel approval, the font of outside counsel approval begins with the Board of Governors, and the president has been delegated to the chancellor. So like some of the other chancellor authorities we talked about last week, this is one that flows directly from the system office to the chancellor. Or it's within the chancellor's inherent authority as a campus executive over legal affairs. If it's something specific, like an outside counsel engagement, that is ultimately beginning with the Board of Governors, or a settlement authority question, but legal affairs generally is a function of the chancellor's executive authority.
Okay, so just to be clear then, just so I make sure I'm following this, on Exhibit A, there's effectively no ability for the Board of Trustees to make any changes here because of the way that the authority flows, in your legal opinion.
Yes.
Well,
Okay,
not
really no reason to review Exhibit A if there's no way to change it.
that's not completely accurate. We do have policy-making authority because some of the authorities of the chancellor are subject to policies of the Board of Trustees and the Board of Governors. A
But I'm just trying to
policy-
clear up on Exhibit A, there's no changes we're going to be able to make in this meeting. So there's really no reason for me to review and comment on Exhibit A if we can't make any changes to it.
I would say that's correct, Trustee Cotis.
All right. Just trying to be clear to save time. So we skip Exhibit A then. And if I'd known that to begin with, I would have skipped it already. But, okay, so the second part, Exhibit B, my questions really have to do with tenure and tenure track. So I know we have approval of the conferral of tenure, but could you differentiate that with tenure track and classifications of faculty members with tenure and classifications of tenure track faculty members? And let me see. And establishing salary for faculty members with tenure and salary for tenure track faculty.
Yes, sir, trustee Cotis. So what I'll do is, if it's okay, I'll turn the floor over to the provost. This is his area.
Great.
So could you just direct the specifics of the question?
Sure. So what I'm trying to understand with regard to tenure and tenure track employees, at some point in time, there is a conferral of tenure by the Board of Trustees. But there are other mentions in here to various classifications of faculty members with tenure, the appointment of tenure track. So let's say someone is appointed tenure track. Does it still then require the approval of the Board of Trustees for the conferral of tenure, or once they're on that tenure track, are we promising that person that they will receive tenure at one point?
Yes, currently the board would not have the responsibility of approving a tenured track position, but they would have the responsibility of conferring tenure at the time that tenure decision was made, either as a person coming in as a junior faculty member who would be in the tenure track and would go up and ultimately become tenured at their 7th year, or someone who we were recruiting who was already tenured at another institution or would come here with tenure. The Board of Trustees would obviously still have the responsibility of appointing tenure at that point.
So you made a comment about automatically receiving tenure at the 7-year mark.
Automatically receiving tenure when?
It was just a comment you just made. You said if they're tenure track and they automatically qualify for tenure at the 7-year mark, I believe is what I heard you say.
Yeah, so the tenure track, an individual who comes in, say, as an assistant professor, they have up to 4 years. They go through two periods of appointment. Their first appointment is 4 years as an assistant professor. Then they have a second term of 3 years as an assistant professor, each of which goes through extensive review. And then they are brought forward for tenure review. And then if the APT committee recommends that to the provost then recommends that to the Board of Trustees for their consideration. That is the point that the trustees would have an actionable item.
Okay, so it still is, just want to make sure I was clear on that. So any conferral of tenure will ultimately come before the Board of Trustees,
That's
Absolutely.
correct.
but they could be tenure track before then without coming before.
That's correct.
Okay. That answers all my questions in Exhibit B then. And then Exhibit C, well, before I get into Exhibit C, are we able to make changes here? Because if we're not, I don't want to waste everybody's time talking about it.
Say that again, trustee Cotis. I didn't hear you.
Exhibit C, are we able to change delegation there, or is that fixed?
So exhibit C lists all the delegations of the board.
Right. Okay, let me pop down to. There are several items in there where there's a comment, BOT did not request this delegated authority. Could you explain what that means?
Give me a reference.
Sure, I know where he is. He is, the trustee Cotis is probably on, I'll give you the page, give me 1 second. It's buildings and property.
It's page 33.
Yeah, 33. And if Vice Chancellor Knuffman was here, I think you can answer it right away. If he's on, Nate, if you'd like to speak. Otherwise, Mr. Maloof here, I think could answer as well. I'm probably third. But this has to do with a Board of Governors change from a couple years ago I believe, that authorize certain campuses to request additional authority, certain BOTs to request it. My understanding is that this campus's BOT did not request that additional authority yet. You may still be eligible to do so. Mr. Malou, why don't you go from there?
Yeah, so I made that motion back when I was on the BOG.
Okay.
To provide further delegation to the Board of Trustees in these matters. So.
Trustee Cotis, this is Michael Maloof. You recall that. I don't need to tell you what that is.
Yeah.
We have not requested any additional delegated authority as to acquisition, disposition of real estate, or approval of construction or capital projects. So all of our thresholds right now on this campus still sit under the standards and the thresholds that are here in the chart. But you're
Okay.
right.
Yeah, when I made the motion, I don't think I contemplated that people would have to request that authority. I thought that would be given at that time, but you're saying the way it was worded required the
Correct.
trustees to
That
request.
is something we could request. We have not today.
All right, that answers that question.
20.
And then on page 40, regarding policy on advisory committee on undergraduate admissions and respect to appeals on there. These are appeals of admissions. Can you explain that delegation of authority?
For appeal admissions,
Yes.
okay, and the page number again.
That's page 40.
Oh, 40.
Well, page 40 of the PDF. I don't
Oh,
know.
I'm sorry.
That's 25 of 51.
Okay.
Right, so, and Provost Bluen can confirm for me, my understanding is that has been delegated, the individual admissions appeal has been delegated from the Board of Trustees to the Office of the Provost with an initial review by the Dean of Admissions. Is that correct? Provost Bluen? That's correct. And in other words, the last stop on the appeal is the Provost right now. That's correct. As delegated from the board. That's correct. This board.
Okay, I guess my concern here is thinking through some of the lawsuits that are out there. I just think that it might be worthwhile for us to hear something if someone has gone through the entire process of the various steps of appeal to allow a final appeal to be heard by the Board of Trustees or to be considered. But
Is that in the form of a motion?
yes,
To amend?
I second that.
Trustee Cotis, is that in the form of a motion to amend?
yes, it is.
Okay, so I understand on the floor, there is a motion to amend the document that extends the authority on admissions appeals
Of an individual.
of an individual admissions candidate. From
That's
the-
correct. And that is not to replace the existing series of appeals and reviews. It would add a final step. So this would only be if the provost denied it at that point and someone had continued this through and appealed further. And my rationale on that is, we've got a pretty significant financial case out there. And I just want to make sure that we review and avoid any potential problems going forward if they reach that level of appeal.
So the motion is with respect to delegation of admissions on appeals by students to keep the current status, but add an additional step of a final appeal to the Board of Trustees. Is that correct, Trustee Cotis?
Yes, and then could you clarify on item 1, the admissions policy? I thought we said the Board of Trustees crafted that, but this is saying with respect to the policy, the advisory committee but it doesn't say what that means. Does that mean we-
There is a standing committee, and I can let the chancellor talk to that, speak to that. There is a standing committee of faculty and other professionals on campus who advise the admissions department on the standards that the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill sets for admissions. Am I correct on that, Mr. Chancellor?
Yes, it's under our enrollment team. It's a combination of folks from that office and admissions and a small faculty committee. Bob, you meet regularly with them.
That's correct.
And I would move also that as part, we can put in one motion or we can put in two.
You've
That
got a
the-
motion to amend one, which is to add the Board of Trustees as a final appeal on admissions after the provost.
Okay. And the second item, that-
I would ask legal to craft that correctly.
yeah, and the second item that's in the same block right here is the idea of giving the Board of Trustees final review and approval of that admission policy.
All right, let's deal with them one at a time. The provost can comment on the appeal process.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment in terms of how these appeals are reviewed and what the basis of an appeal would be. When the appeal comes to the provost's office, the appeal is evaluated primarily with regards to process. You know, it does not look at the credentials of the student in relationship to other students. It assures that the processes of the university have been followed without bias or prejudice. And so we have been very careful around this point, mainly to minimize or avoid litigation on the back end in order to protect the interests of the university while at the same time preserving our high standards.
Well, I have to point out, if the intent was to avoid litigation, it didn't work out.
Can you clarify that point? Is that trustee Pryor?
Yeah. Just talking about the litigation that we're waiting for the results of right now.
But did that litigation result from an appeal person going through the appeal process we're talking about now?
I don't know that, but you know.
No, it was not as a result of an appeal.
So that's apples and oranges, because that was going to be my next question. To what extent the provost can speak to how many times people go through this appeal process so we know exactly what we're dealing with. And then my question to trustee Cotis is, what's going to be the criteria for us overriding what the provost says so that we don't incur liability as trustees if we have a different set of criteria that we use as a public institution?
Yeah, we have less than 5, 6 a year in terms of formal appeals that reach the provost.
Are students told when they?
Hold on, trustee Minkins, I'm gonna call
Yeah.
you.
Yeah,
Can I answer trustee Artis's
Yes,
question?
okay. Trustee Cotis, answer that, and then I'm gonna go to trustee Minkins.
So,
I'm gonna go to Mr. Richards, and then we're gonna move on.
Every time we take an action, every time we do something, we're imposing our will upon the university at that time. So I'm not sure what makes this any different.
Well, I guess the concern is, if we're trying to avoid litigation, then we need to know what is the criteria we're going to use for review. Because if the provost's review is based on trying to make sure that we abide by whatever are the outstanding legal precedents for admissions, then it seems like if we use a different criteria, then we are potentially exposing university to legal liability. And I just would want to know, what is the criteria we would use if it's going to be different than the provost? If it's just because we are scared of lawsuits, it could set a precedent that creates problems in the future. So that's the reason why I just would want to know, what criteria would we be using as a board if it's going to be different than the provost?
Yeah, so my criteria wouldn't be to avoid lawsuits. It would be to treat all applicants to the university fairly.
Well, I certainly hope our provost would be doing the same.
Trustee Meekins, I'm point of order, trustee Meekins.
Thank you. I guess I would echo what trustee Artis Neal is saying. And for every comment she has, there may be 3 or 4 or 5 more that we might come up with as a group, concerns that we might have if we're given the opportunity to vet this out and think about it. I don't see the urgency in going through this document and trying to fix every concern we might have. Mr. Cotis may have an excellent point, and it may be that we all agree with his point eventually, but I'm not going to be able to absorb this particular request and make an intelligent decision whether it's going to work or would be good or not, unless I know all the facts behind it and how it might affect the university, how it might affect our agenda moving forward, and the concerns that Ms. Artis Neal has. So I guess what I would say, if we're going to start talking about these things that are just coming up, I'm going to, I guess, ask to table the specific points to some date in the future that we can talk about it. Because and I may be alone. I may be the only one that doesn't want to vote on something I haven't been fully vetted on in this regard.
To clarify, on the left-hand side, it talks about no appeal concerning individual admission case shall lie beyond the institutional board of trustees. So there is a consideration of this delegation already. And we've been tasked to review the delegation from the Board of Governors to the Board of Trustees and any further delegation. And that's been the task. We had 2.5 hours be vetted on that. We were told to hold our comments about this until here. If there needs to be a delay for people to review and discuss, I'm not in charge of this meeting, but I don't know the sense of urgency on when this has to be submitted. But we're told to save our comments for today, make them and go through and consider, and that's our job. We have to do our job when we're on this board. It can't just be rubber stamping or
All right,
otherwise we don't serve a purpose.
correct. Well, I mean, the point of this meeting is to discuss this. And, but there is a motion on the floor. And so we have a motion on the floor to amend the delegation to add the Board of Trustees. Now, that motion, I would need a second to that motion before I could get a substitute motion or any additional discussion.
Can you
have a second
where we are?
Is the motion.
So there is a second.
Yeah.
There is a second. There's a first and a second. So now I need discussion on this particular motion.
And we're talking about on the final appeal resting with the Board of Trustees.
Yes, sir. You have a second on that.
Yeah, and again, my rationale on that is we're talking about maybe 4 or 5 cases. Is that correct? That come before the provost, and so presumably it would be that number or a subset of that if historical appeals hold. Is that a fair assumption?
Mr. Provost.
Yeah, that's the number that I cited. I think it would be in the 5 to 10 range on average.
Okay. And I would suggest we make time for things like that by instead of having to review materials that have been sent to us in advance, we make sure everybody's read the materials and we can just launch into a discussion in our meetings.
And Mr. Chair?
Yes. Well, let me say something first on Mr. Cotis. I would say that, you know, this document, let's keep in mind, this document is not going to be a final document. This document is going to go to the system office, and there will be an opportunity at that time for Chancellor, you want to speak to that opportunity to discuss certain matters?
Just going to say, and Chair Bullock and I will meet with President Hans to look at the proposed changes, and these particular points around admissions, it might be useful to see if other system schools have similar, not necessarily changes, but maybe they're part of their existing policies that would help guide our decision-making about potential amendments to this with DOT having the final appeal on this and or looking at the policy on admissions. So there will be another opportunity to get further guidance and see what best practices are.
So, but I do have a motion on the floor and I have a second. I know Trustee Meekins, I'm gonna call on you for discussion.
Well, I've sat on an appeal for a personnel matter, and it's a very involved process. the board sets up generally a committee. I think Chair Bolduc, you served on one with me. And it involved a lot of legal time, a lot of legal hours. I think 3 trustees and briefs and all kind of things. So those are the kind of things that, if we're going to really think about this and go this route, I'm not saying I'm against it. I'm just saying we need to really explore it and talk about it before we just decide to put it in this document, in my opinion.
Well, okay, thank you. Do you have any additional discussion?
Yeah, and to clarify, I'm contemplating this as a final appeal, as mentioned in that box on the left, where it's talking about the authority. And
Great.
presumably this would have already been reviewed at several different levels before it comes to us. And we're talking about 5 cases, maybe reduced down to 3 or 1. And we will have the benefit of the prior review and appeals to consult. So
Thank you.
I think that it's just providing, a final review.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All right, hearing none, Mr. Secretary, we need a vote on this on the amendment to add Board of Trustees as a final appeal on admissions. Do we need a roll call vote, Mr. Secretary, to add this to the doc, or Mr. Assistant Secretary, you're gonna do that because we're in, here.
Ms. Artis Neal,
No.
Mr. Bolduc,
Yes.
Mr. Bryan,
Yes.
Mr. Davis,
Pass.
next passes, Dr. Jones. Dr. Jones. Mr. Curtis,
Yes.
Mr. McCollum,
Yes.
Mr. Meekins,
No, at this time.
Mr. Johnson absent, Mr. Pryor,
Yes.
Mr. Richards,
No.
Mr. Turner,
Yes.
Ms. White. She don't find- Mrs. White. Mr. Davis,
Yes.
Okay, amendment passes. That'll be added to the proposed document that'll be sent to the system president, Mr. Hans. All right, Mr. Curtis, did you have anything?
I
else?
only have 6 more. That's it.
Okay, let's,
And then I'm done. And some of them may just be clarifications. I'll try and keep them quick.
sir.
So and we talked about this item 1 here with respect to the policy, the admissions policy. I'm reading that as a delegation from the Board of Trustees to the Advisory Committee on Undergraduate Admissions and Office of Undergraduate Admissions for final approval. And I believe that final approval of the admissions policy for the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill should rest with its Board of Trustees. And I would move to amend this delegation to reflect that.
State that again, Trustee Curtis.
So we're adding to this delegation, the final approval of the policy shall rest with the Board of Trustees.
Can we show that on the
Give the
screen?
advice of the advisory committee, but the final approval of the policy would rest with the Board of Trustees.
Is that on 700, 1.1? Is that where we are?
That is just above the one I just mentioned, which is page 25 of 51 of the doc. And it's referencing Code Appendix 1, Section 8. And over in delegation, it's delegation number 1, where it starts with respect to the policy.
Okay, so you have a form of, is that in the form of a motion?
Yeah, my motion would be that final review and approval of the admissions policy would rest with the Board of Trustees.
Could we see language?
So we're not delegating that final authority. So
Is there a second to that motion to amend?
A second.
I have a second from trustee Pryor. Is there any discussion? Hearing no discussion.
I'm really, I mean,
Okay, Ralph, your hand is like permanently up, so that's why I'm not seeing.
I can't, that's okay.
Okay,
I didn't
I'm
raise my
sorry.
hand.
I apologize. It's just.
Could
so
we
raise
see
your
it in
hand-
writing?
Raise your hand if you want to talk, because I don't know that hand's permanently up.
You know, we're going through this fairly quickly. I want to make sure exactly what we're doing, so I know what I'm voting for and what I'm not voting for. This admission policy is up on the screen now. And so, Marty, just bear
Yeah,
with me.
so Ralph, what we're voting on is that the final review and approval of the admissions policy of the university would rest with the Board of Trustees.
And who does it rest with now?
It rests with the Advisory Committee on Undergraduate Admissions and Office of Undergraduate Admissions.
All right, so do we know what effect that might have, or have we had any input or discussion with them as to this particular change? Have we discussed it with faculty, with staff, with administration?
So let me add this, Mr. Maloof, who we didn't get in the weeds on this particular issue, but he does have some instruction on this, trustee Cotis, that may change things. Mr. Maloof, can you inform?
Yeah, so trustee Cotis, this is a little bit of a imprecision on the box here, but with respect to the admissions policy, that is a BOT policy already.
It is the
So-
policy of the board to give it to the advisory committee. So that would require a policy change, which would make it out of order to change this document at this point.
Okay, so just to be clear then, maybe you remove that because we have not delegated our authority. And what we're reviewing today is where we've delegated our authority.
Well, I think it's a misstatement of the technicalities of what it's done. We haven't delegated that authority. We have created a policy that the university follows. And they're summarizing that policy in that box.
I don't want to complicate this matter. I think when I looked at this a while back, I believe that there was a delegation within your current policy that you originally enacted in 1976 that included subsequent policy-making authority to this Committee on Undergraduate Admissions, not taking the ultimate policy-making authority away from the Board of Trustees, but allowing for some subsequent policies to be made by this advisory. You may need some
And to
extra
that end, I would,
to clarify that, so I don't want to state that as as black letter law by any stretch.
I very much appreciate that. And I would say to the extent we have delegated any authority to modify or change that policy going forward without our review and approval, that we pull that back.
Well, they can't, I mean, I would suggest that they can't change that policy without our approval now, because we're the ones, we in 76, I mean, the version of us in 76 created the policy.
Okay, well, if we can just state that here to clarify, then that would solve
That'd be
it.
fine. I think that's in order. So do you wish to remove your motion to amend and
If
ask for a
it's-
motion to clarify?
Yes, if
No motion, but point of clarification.
Exhibit C, section delegation 1 is changed to say any modifications to the policy rest with the Board of Trustees, then there's really no delegation there, right? So
There isn't, we already have that, and we have not delegated it. We have set the policy.
Okay.
The university follows the policy.
all right, then let's just clarify, because really that
Consistent with
affects
best
that whole
practice.
section there. The, that whole block there that we're seeing on the screen that says 1 and 2, with the
Well, I would
amendments we've just made and with this other clarification of 1, then there is no delegation.
Correct. That's correct.
Okay,
You are correct. So I'm going to take that as a friendly amendment, just to clarify and to
yeah,
remove.
if we can just modify that to reflect it.
Thanks. Okay, What's next, Mr. Cotis? We need to move on.
So, next is tuition and fees. Could you clarify on that? That is page 36 of 51. Delegation of the chancellor. And then the subdelegation to the cashier's office.
That is correct. It's his job to collect fees and tuition. And he has delegated that, I'm sure, hasn't delegated that. He's in charge of that. The chancellor's in charge of collecting the tuition and fees. We set it, but he collects it.
Okay. So, I mean, is that a delegation or is that just a?
No, that's just a statement of authority that's given to the
And
chancellor.
maybe we just make a clarification then to say, we're not delegating that, right? What we're doing is there's someone in the organization that actually does that.
So understand the encompassment of this particular exhibit. It is just a delegated authorities chart. It is our chart, but it sort of is the roadmap and shows us who has the authority. Doesn't necessarily, each one of these items does not necessarily coincide with an authority that we have delegated. Some of these are directly delegated to the chancellor for his execution. And this is one of those instances. Am I
No,
correct?
this is one where the authority rests with your board, but you don't actually
We don't do it.
collect them. And trustee Cotis, I think I understand your point, and this is, there's a necessary imprecision here. I mean, you could see it as the chancellor's just executing under his authority, causing to be collected. He's executing that. I think you could also treat it as just a delegation of authority that you're not going to collect that, this board.
Yeah.
But you're gonna necessarily delegate it to the executive. Either way, I think this simply reflects that the work is being done at the chancellor's level. So
Yeah, if you could clean that up, I think what you're, we're not saying that one person several rungs down could decide next year they're just not going to charge tuition, right?
And that's
So,
not the
we're not-
issue. That's
yeah, that's not
collection
the
of the
issue.
money.
This is all about collection. And you actually, in the 1995, there's a 1995 resolution, I think that Mr. Maloof found. And you notice there that we said next to the source, it's also the chancellor's authority as administrative and executive head. That's sort of, I think that's the point there, is that that's his inherent executive authority, but it flows from an ultimate authority you have as the collector, for lack of a better term.
Right.
As a quick clarification, this is Nate Knuckman. In terms of tuition and fees each year, that is, there would be no risk to tuition being changed without going through a pretty extensive process on campus and then going to the Board of Trustees for approval, which we'll actually be considering in a couple of weeks here in the first week of November. That will then be, sent to the system office and the Board of Governors for that process. So that's not a risk. This is really just execution and collection of the tuition.
Okay. Next
This-
item.
This is the bursar's office. I mean, that's what that is.
Okay. Next item would be on page 44 of 51. Auxiliary enterprises, utilities, and miscellaneous facilities. I think when we start talking about power plants and utility systems, that the ultimate authority for those items should rest with the Board of Trustees. Not necessarily the operation, but to the extent there's going to be a significant modification.
I think in this one, we did try to draw a very precise distinction between the policymaking authority, which you do retain, and I think you see it says no further delegation on that, meaning it doesn't leave you. But with respect to the control and supervision, in quote, I think that was reflecting the executive nature of that authority, which would flow to the chancellor.
The management, the
Yeah.
day-to-day management of the power.
Yeah, the
plant.
day-to-day management, but if you were going to close something or sell it,
That still rests with the Board of Trustees.
Yeah, that would be your policymaking authority.
all right?
It's not been delegated.
And the board.
Okay.
And the legislature.
And last three, the last two, campus law enforcement agencies. which is
Page
page
45.
45. Yeah. Can you clarify item 2?
Sure, and this might be a statutory anachronism because this is an old statute. But this initially set the establishment of the law enforcement agency on campus with the board, but obviously that is managed and operated by the chancellor as the campus executive. There is a reference in the statute to employing campus police officers, which obviously you all don't do directly. So to the extent these are EHRA employees, they will be wrapped up in management flexibility generally and as EHRA employees.
You answered my
To the
question.
extent
Yep.
police are SHRA, they wouldn't flow to the board of trustees to begin with.
Yep, I'm good on that one. We can move
Okay.
to the next one. So last item would be page 48 of 51, patent policy.
Right.
Can you further explain that?
Yes, and I wish we had our IP attorney with us today. Because he and I did look at this several weeks ago in preparation of this chart. But generally, I think what we've said here is you all did originally adapt patent and copyright procedures in 1983. Then the university issued an updated patent and invention policy in 2009. And that's a university policy, and that's the current policy that's in place.
Okay.
And I
So this
believe
is
there's
all under, if we want to review a policy, we're going to do that outside of this discussion.
yes, that's right.
That's
And I'd be
correct.
happy to follow up with some
And
more.
I'm good.
information. I do have some backing.
So at this point though, trustee Curtis, I'm gonna cut you off. We're gonna take a 5-minute bathroom break. Calling a recess for 5 minutes.
Dave, are you singing along with those hand motions? I just want to know the song so I can join in.
So what do you think, guys? We got another 3-4 hours or what?
I was on my last point. I've already finished my comments now.
Hey, Vice Chair Pryor, if it goes after 5, I'm taking off my coat and tie. That's all I'm saying.
You're looking very sharp today, Gene. I didn't mention that earlier. I mean that too.
Kevin, this is Haywood. Sorry, I couldn't resist. I was just doing my imitation of Haywood.
Sounds just like him.
Gene, to answer your earlier question about how many times the BOG meets, if you look at the, if you go to the BOG meetings and click on past, it was over 30 times in 2020. But those include, you know, teleconference meetings.
Yeah. Wow. That's a lot of work, brother.
Yeah, I feel like I'm on vacation now.
I love your art, by the way, Marty.
Thanks. 2 great local artists.
I'm familiar with the artist who did your Sun Tzu behind you.
Yeah, are you ready?
He did another fun one that's Where the Wild Things Are out back too. You have to come over and see them.
Love that book. Would love to see him.
On YouTube? Huh? Okay, great. Good. I'm gonna call us out of recess. Just to clarify, the amendments that are added to the document, we'll add them and you can see on the share screen where we've added them. They are subject to legal cleaning them up and making them more clear with respect to what the intent of the amendment was. So I want to make that clear. Also reiterate again that this is not a final document, that this document will go to President Hans. Myself and the Chancellor will present that to President Hans, and then it will then come back to this board for a final approval. Okay, Mr. Cotis, you have the floor. You said you had one other thing you wanted to discuss.
Oh, that was the last one.
Great. Okay, so you don't have anything else. Great. Is there any other discussion? We have a motion on the floor to accept this document now as amended. Are there any other motions to amend? Hearing no other motions to amend, I'll make a motion to approve the document as amended. And I need a second for that motion. Do I have a second? Yes, I have a second. Okay, Mr. Secretary, will you call the roll?
We can have any discussion. I have one question, Chair Bogan. I'm
Yes,
sorry.
we do have a discussion. That's correct. Yes, sir.
Very quickly, we've been through a lot. And I guess the question I would have of those who are not voting, Becky, Chancellor Guskowitz, Bob Lewin, anybody else, we're about to pass this. I'm not asking you if you agree with any of it or disagree with any of it, but have you heard us about to do anything that would be in your opinion, a huge, huge, colossal mistake?
I'll jump in.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Yes, no, I think that with the further clarifications around the tier 2s, that's where I had my concerns about the process by which those tier 2 appointments and salary adjustments would be made. As I've said over and over throughout this process, is we have to keep our process efficient with the number of transactions and personnel actions that take place at a university of our size and magnitude. We got to be sure, and I know that we will still work on the process by which that will be accomplished so that we do not lose those efficiencies, run the risk of losing good people that we need to try to retain, and appointments of new people into positions such as senior associate dean positions that are critical. They function in many places like deans. They're overseeing 16 to 20 units. And if somebody leaves and we have to replace that person, I need to be sure that we can do that efficiently. So with that point in a process by which we're going to do that, I'm comfortable.
I would just echo that, and maybe add a slightly different level of concern, and that is we are competing with talent, and that talent is being sought after by our peers at the national level, and timing, particularly when making offers to these individuals, timing becomes critical for many of them. So just to pick up on the point that the chancellor made, I just want to make sure that whatever we do, that we don't tie our hands such that we will no longer be competitive for the best talent. Turnaround time to execute does matter if we're going to get our top one or two choices.
Thank you, Mr. Provost. One point of clarification before we go into a vote. Trustee White and Trustee Jones had got knocked off on the amendment presented by Trustee Cotis. Can I have a vote from Trustee White with respect to the amendment that Trustee Cotis proposed? Yes or no?
Yes.
Dr. Jones, Trustee Jones, your vote as to Trustee Cotis's amendment.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Mr. Assistant Secretary. So we do have a motion on the floor to accept the document as amended, to be sent to by myself and the Chancellor to present this document to President Hans for his review. And then subsequent to that review, this document will come back to this board for final approval. We have that motion on the floor and we have a proper second. I'll call on the Secretary of the University, Mr. Turner, Trustee Turner, to call the roll.
Ms. Artis-Neal,
Yes.
Mr. Bryant,
Yes.
Mr. Davis,
Yes.
Dr. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Cotis. Mr. Cotis.
Yes.
Yes, there we go.
Technical difficulty there.
All good. Mr. McCullough,
Yes.
Mr. Meekins,
Yes.
Mr. Patel is absent. Mr. Pryor,
Yes.
Mr. Richards.
Yes.
I too am a yes. Ms. White
Yes.
and Mr. Bullock.
Yes, chair votes yes. Motion passes.
Motion passes.
So I now need a motion to adjourn. Do I have, I'll move to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Trustee Davis seconds the motion. Mr. Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Ms. Artis-Neal,
Yes.
Mr. Bryant,
Yes.
Mr. Davis,
Yes.
Dr. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Cotis,
Yes.
Mr. McCullough,
Yes.
Mr. Meekins,
Yes.
Mr. Pryor,
Yes.
Mr. Richards.
Yes.
I am a yes. Ms. White
Yes.
and Mr. Bullock.
Chair votes yes. Thank you. We are. I forgot.
I can. And